For that at 6:35 now. Now, the Fees Commission report released yesterday was set up to investigate the feasibility of free tertiary education for students. The fight for free education has sparked widespread student protests nationally. This year, the University of Cape Town experienced class disruptions, with students calling for the report. Now released, the Fees Commission indicated that the free tertiary education is unaffordable and has made other recommendations. Now, joining us is Seipati Tshabalala, UCT's outgoing SRC President, and Sihle Lonzi, Student Advocacy Coordinator. A very good morning to you both. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Morning Live. Seipati, if I can maybe start with you. The fact that the report says, the Fees Commission report says tertiary education, free tertiary education at this stage is unaffordable. What's your reaction to that?
Okay, honestly, we were not surprised at the pronunciations of the report, because we had even seen in the interim report and, you know, in the leaks and in the talk around it, that the conversation was necessarily going to give us an answer that says free education is not feasible. What we are angry about, and I'm basing this on the executive summary of the report that we've read. We haven't read the 700-page report yet. We will be doing so in December. What is angering is that the report doesn't detail the decommodifying of education, and that was the call of Fees Must Fall, to decommodify tertiary higher education, to, you know, end the problem of it being an access issue for those who can afford. And this report didn't answer that adequately.
When you say decommodify, what do you mean exactly?
So the issue with tertiary education currently is that it's only accessible to the wealthy. And for the poor who then want to get onto tertiary education, they must take on NSFAS loans or bank loans. And that is a matter of restricting access to students. And when we said free education, we said free education for all, because we wanted to eliminate the issue of access to education. Moreover, remove the control that the private sector already has. Banks already have control over education at a tertiary level, in that they provide certain loans and they make certain profits from sponsoring students to go to varsity.
Yeah. Sihle, do you appreciate the current economic situation that South Africa is actually in order to, as a possible reason, I guess, for the lack of funding for this?
Look, I mean, definitely we must recognize that at the end of the day, there must be the political will, you know. The state, your so-called, your ruling, the governing class must have the necessary backbone to be able to make radical policies to try and change, what has been historically and structurally disadvantaging black people. So though we understand that our economy is not necessarily in its state where it should be, and part of that is it's been 23 years. What has the government then done to really redistribute and change the game when it comes to the economy? You know, it was not enough for us to just get the vote in 94. But who still owns the means of production? Who still owns the mines? Who still owns the banks? So yes, I mean, people can cry about the rand. Yes, we can say we are in junk status. But the reality is the economy can boom, but if it only booms for the few, what does that mean for the rest of South Africa?
One of the recommendations was that government increase higher education expenditure to at least 1% of the GDP. What's your opinion on that?
Look, I mean, first, I think we must acknowledge that the report itself is about 752 pages long. So as the president has already said, we've looked at the executive summaries, but we've not quite read it substantively to check what it speaks to. But I mean, I also want to mention this. The reason why students already rejected the report, even at its offset, was that we saw that the basis and the fundamental issue behind it was that it was speaking to feasibility. And that is not necessarily what the students had asked for. In fact, I want to argue that the students have long answered the question of feasibility. There have been many submissions to states. There have been many submissions to universities themselves speaking to this question of free education. I mean, I know in the University of Cape Town, there was the establishment of the Free Education Planning Group speaking to the different models in which we can try and fund this thing. So we were not really interested in whether or not free education was feasible. But again, we just needed a government who has the political backbone, a government with the necessary political will to then pronounce on free education. I think we must also recognize that the report itself, it merely makes recommendations. I mean, if you read the concluding remarks, it does not make any real pronouncements. So ultimately, the ball is then thrown back to the president and the ministerial committee to come up and really take a stance on free education. Yeah.
Seipati, there's seemingly positive recommendations as well, isn't it? I mean, for the fact that the report recommended that registration and application fees be scrapped across the board, I guess that's positive.
Yes, definitely. There are some positives in the report, but again, this report is a recommendation. So even the point that I read that point and I was so happy because it then places the onus on institutions. The point that registration and application fees must be scrapped is then going to lie in the decision of a university. So at UCT, the Vice Chancellor, Dr. Max Price, will then have to decide, is he going to continue financially excluding students because they don't have the fees to pay for registration or their applications, or is he going to maybe accept the recommendation of the report? It also, we need to acknowledge that also they say they're going to be devoting more resources to TVETs and so on, and there'll be better equipping and resourcing of those students, giving them stipends and so on. However, that still doesn't answer the question of free for all or decommodifying. And I emphasize again decommodifying because the Free Education Planning Group at UCT further made submissions and recommendations that we should then, in an attempt to decommodify, we should then use things like community service, require graduates to do community service that pertains to their degree. So serve the country again after we've given you your degree for 2 to 3 years. There's things like graduate taxes that we were pushing for, income contingent tax at the top to actually fund and redistribute towards free education. So I've even heard rumors that the president obviously has the chance now to actually make a pronunciation, and there's a rumor that the president might say that we need to redirect funds from the health sector or some other sector towards free education, and that is not necessarily favorable to us. It's not, we reject those stances because we gave adequate models. As I say again, the Free Education Planning Group went and presented to the commission that, look, a certain redirecting of a certain percentage in sectors such as like banking, we can use that sort of resource, that funding towards higher education. However, now the Fees Commission report then recommends that the private sector, necessarily banks, take on the income contingent loans, and then also SARS must come on board to collect those loans. And that doesn't solve the fundamental issue of this debt. The chairperson of NSFAS has said over and over, of the 20 billion rand they've awarded in loans, they've only collected 200 million. So how are you going to propose another loan in answer to a question of free education? You're not decommodifying, you're placing it in other hands, and those hands are banks. And that's problematic because, again, we're commercializing degrees. That means the wealthy will get those degrees. Again, it's a perpetuation of this issue.
Seipati, I just want to get in one more question. What's the next step? Has the SRC applied its mind into going forward?
As I'm no longer in the SRC, I am, again, a Fees Must Fall activist and EFFSC member. I will absolutely be reading this report. The Free Education Planning Group has said to me that, the director has said to me that they will be spending the December vacation reading the 700-page report so they can come back. As students, we have a responsibility to knowledge and we want to, critique it adequately. So they did say to me that ideally in January, they would have a response to the HEHA Commission's report. So the next steps for us again, as movements, as students, is to go sit down and work through this ridiculous 700 pages. Again, that's a problem. The fact that they waffled it so much is a problem. But we will be critiquing it. We'll be then disputing it. And ours is not over. Ours is to decommodify education, to empower people who need it.
I'm sure we'll touch base with you again when you have perused the report fully. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your time. Great insight there. Thanks to Seipati Tshabalala, UCT's outgoing SRC president, and Sihle Lonzi, student advocacy coordinator, for giving us the views on the Fees Commission report released by President Jacob Zuma. It's 6:45. This is Morning Live. Let's take a bit of a break. We'll be back in a short while. Stay with us.